His hands trembled as he reached for the veil. His breath caught. His heart hammered against his ribs. And in that single earth-shattering moment, everything Ambrose Barrington thought he knew about his arranged bride crumbled to dust. He was a billionaire, an heir to one of the oldest, most powerful fortunes in America. A man who had spent weeks convincing himself that the woman beneath that veil was nothing. Ugly, poor, desperate for his money. But when the fabric fell away from her face, he couldn't speak. He couldn't move. He couldn't breathe. Because Ambrose Barrington had never been more wrong about anything in his entire life. Now let me ask you something. Have you ever judged someone before truly knowing them? Have you ever looked at a person and decided, based on nothing but your own assumptions, exactly who they were and what they were worth? Have you ever been so certain you were right, only to discover you were completely, devastatingly wrong? What would you do if your family forced you to marry a complete stranger? Someone you'd never met, someone you'd already decided to despise. And what would you do if that stranger turned out to be the one person capable of changing your entire life? This is the story of Ambrose Barrington, a man born into wealth, raised without warmth, and convinced that money could buy anything, including a wife. When his father arranged his marriage to a woman named Callista Blake, Ambrose didn't bother meeting her. He didn't care to know her. He simply assumed the worst, that she was unattractive, penniless, and chasing his fortune. He called her ugly behind closed doors. He called her a gold digger. He swore he would never love her. But what Ambrose didn't realize was that his bride carried secrets of her own, secrets that would bring him to his knees. What happens when the veil lifts and everything you believed turns out to be a lie? Will pride destroy what could have been the greatest love story of his life? Or will Ambrose learn the most important lesson of all, that true wealth has nothing to do with money, and true beauty has nothing to do with appearances? This story will challenge everything you think you know about love, judgment, and the power of second chances. It will break your heart and put it back together again. Stay until the very end, because what's coming, you won't see it coming. Welcome to Mr. Roman's Story Vault. Whether you're joining us for the first time or returning for another journey, I'm truly glad you're here. This channel is your home for stories that move you, teach you, and stay with you long after they end. Stories filled with love, redemption, and life lessons you can carry forward. If you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button right now and tap the notification bell so you never miss a story. If this one touches your heart, show some love with a like and drop a comment below. Now, let's begin. Manhattan's skyline belonged to many, but the Barrington Tower dominated it. 68 floors of steel and glass, cutting through the clouds like a monument to ambition. The name etched across the top wasn't just a label, it was a legacy. 4 generations of power, influence, and wealth so vast that most people couldn't comprehend it. Inside the penthouse office on the top floor sat Ambrose Barrington. At 32 years old, he was everything the world expected an heir to be. 6'2", with sharp features that could have been carved from marble. Dark hair, always perfectly styled. Suits tailored in Milan. A jawline that had graced magazine covers and a gaze that could freeze a boardroom into silence. He was the man every woman wanted and every man envied. But no one truly knew him. Ambrose had learned early that emotions were liabilities. His mother, the only person who had ever softened his world, died when he was 8. A car accident on a rainy November night. One moment she was there, kissing him goodnight. The next, she was gone. His father, Robert Barrington, had responded to grief the only way he knew how, by burying himself in work. He never cried, never broke, and he expected his son to do the same. So Ambrose hardened. He excelled at everything. Top of his class at Princeton, MBA from Harvard. By 25, he was sitting on the board. By 30, he was running acquisitions that reshaped industries. But success came at a cost. Relationships became transactions. Women approached him for his name, his money, his connections, never for who he was beneath the designer clothes and cold confidence. He'd stopped trying to find anything real years ago. His penthouse reflected that emptiness. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, minimalist furniture in shades of grey and black. Expensive art he never looked at. A kitchen he never used. It was worth $12 million, and it felt like a tomb. The only warmth in that space came from two things: a Steinway grand piano tucked in the corner and a leather-bound sketchbook hidden in his desk drawer. Late at night, when the city finally quieted and the weight of the day pressed too heavily, Ambrose would sit at that piano and play. Chopin, Debussy, pieces his mother had taught him before she died. No one knew about this. Not his father. Not his colleagues. Not the women who rotated through his life like seasonal fashions. In those solitary hours, Ambrose wasn't a billionaire. He was just a man trying to remember what it felt like to feel something. He sketched, too. Architectural designs, buildings that would never be built, structures of glass and light, open and airy, nothing like the cold towers his family constructed. He'd studied architecture briefly before his father demanded he switch to business. "Barringtons don't create," Robert had said. "We acquire." So Ambrose acquired companies, properties, power, but never connection. There was one secret about Ambrose that even he didn't fully acknowledge. Beneath the ice, there was still a flicker of who he used to be. His mother had run a children's charity before she died, funding art programs for underprivileged kids. After her death, Robert wanted to shut it down. Waste of resources, he'd called it. For 8 years, the foundation limped along under a board of directors, who kept it barely alive out of respect for Eleanor Barrington's memory. Ambrose was 16 when he quietly took control of the foundation. He funneled money into it from his trust fund, kept it running, never told his father. He never visited, never put his name on it. But every quarter, he reviewed the reports and made sure those kids had what they needed. He told himself it was just good tax strategy. Deep down, he knew better. Still, that small act of hidden kindness didn't change the man he'd become. Ambrose judged the world in binaries, valuable or worthless, useful or disposable, worthy or beneath him. He measured people the way he measured companies, by their assets, their status, their return on investment. It was a cold way to live. But it was the only way Ambrose Barrington knew how. As September arrived, he stood in his office, looking out over the city he'd conquered, feeling absolutely nothing. He had no idea that everything was about to change. He had no idea that in 3 months he would stand at an altar and make the biggest mistake and the greatest discovery of his life. Across the river, in a Brooklyn neighborhood where people actually knew their neighbors' names, sat a brownstone that had belonged to the Blake family for 30 years. It wasn't much to look at from the outside. The steps needed repair. The paint was fading. But inside, the walls told stories. Photographs covered every available surface. Graduations, birthdays, family dinners, moments of joy captured and cherished because the Blakes understood something. The Barringtons had forgotten. Memories were the only wealth that mattered. This was where Callista Blake grew up. At 2008, she still lived in her childhood bedroom when she wasn't pulling late nights at the library. She was in her final semester of a master's program in social work, a degree she'd been chipping away at for 4 years while working multiple jobs to pay for it. Callista didn't look like someone carrying the weight of the world. She had luminous brown skin that seemed to glow even under harsh fluorescent lights. Warm, expressive eyes, recently freed from the thick-framed glasses she'd worn for years after finally saving up for contact lenses, that crinkled when she smiled, a laugh that made people want to join in, even if they didn't know the joke. But Callista had never seen her own beauty. Growing up, she'd heard too many voices telling her she wasn't enough. Too dark, too plain, too ordinary. Boys in high school had looked past her. Girls had made comments they thought were jokes. She'd learned to make herself small, to stay quiet, to believe she was forgettable. What Callista didn't realize was that she possessed something far rarer than conventional. Beauty, a heart that refused to harden, even when life gave her every reason to let it. Her father, Jonathan Blake, had been her hero. A mechanic by trade, he'd worked with his hands his whole life. He fixed cars, yes, but he also fixed broken playground equipment on weekends and helped elderly neighbors with repairs they couldn't afford. "We might not have much, Callie," he used to say, "but we've got enough to share." Jonathan had attended Columbia University on a scholarship, the first in his family to go to college. That's where he'd met Robert Barrington, his unlikely roommate. They were opposites. Jonathan from the Bronx, working 2 jobs to stay enrolled. Robert from old money, never having worried about a bill in his life. But they became brothers anyway. During their junior year, on a spring break trip to the Cape, Robert had fallen overboard during a sailing accident. He'd hit his head, gone under, and would have drowned if Jonathan hadn't jumped in and dragged him back to the boat. Robert never forgot that debt. They stayed friends after graduation, though their lives went in vastly different directions. Robert built an empire. Jonathan built a family. When Calista was 25, her father was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The next 18 months were a nightmare. Treatments, hospital stays, bills that multiplied faster than they could count. Jonathan fought hard, but the cancer fought harder. He died on a Tuesday morning in March, holding his wife's hand and whispering Calista's name. The medical debt he left behind was crushing. Over $200,000. Diane Blake, Calista's mother, took on a second job as a night shift nurse. Calista dropped to part-time student status and started working 3 jobs, a morning shift at a coffee shop, afternoon admin work at a law office, and weekend coordination at a youth center. The youth center was the only job she actually loved. It was a small non-profit in her neighborhood, offering after-school programs for kids who had nowhere else to go. Calista ran an art program, painting, drawing, sculpture. She'd arrive exhausted from her other jobs and somehow find energy when she saw those kids. One Friday night in early September, everyone else had gone home. Calista was cleaning up when she noticed one of her students, a 15-year-old named Tyler, still sitting at a table. "You okay?" she asked. He shrugged. "My mom didn't get paid yet. There's no food at home." Calista's heart broke. She reached into her purse and pulled out a $20 bill, the only cash she had until her next paycheck. "Here," she said, pressing it into his hand. "Get yourself something to eat." "Miss Blake, I can't." "Yes, you can." "And Tyler, you're going to be fine. I believe in you." He left with tears in his eyes. Calista went home and made herself a meal of crackers and peanut butter. She'd skipped lunch to save money, and now she'd given away her dinner funds. But she didn't regret it, not for a second. That was who Calista Blake was, someone who gave even when she had nothing left, someone who loved even when the world had taught her she wasn't worth loving back. She had no idea that her life was about to change. She had no idea that a promise made decades ago was about to come due, and that she would be the payment. Robert Barrington had not forgotten Jonathan Blake. In the 30 years since that day on the water, he'd carried the weight of a life debt. Jonathan had saved him, and though they'd drifted apart as their worlds diverged, Robert had always intended to repay that kindness. When he learned Jonathan was dying, he visited the hospital. Jonathan was thin, frail, barely recognizable, but his eyes still held that same stubborn warmth. "Rob," Jonathan said weakly, managing a smile, "still wearing suits that cost more than my car?" Robert laughed, despite the pain in his chest. Some things never change. They talked for an hour, about old times, about regrets, about family. "Diane and Calista are going to be okay," Robert promised. "I'll make sure of it." Jonathan gripped his hand. "You don't owe me anything, brother." "I owe you everything," Robert said quietly, "and I always pay my debts." Jonathan died 2 weeks later. Robert attended the funeral, standing in the back, unnoticed among the crowd of people whose lives Jonathan had touched. He saw Diane, strong even in grief, and he saw Calista, 26 years old, crying silently, holding her mother's hand. He made a decision that day. A year and a half passed. Robert kept tabs on the Blake family from a distance. He saw the medical bills piling up, saw Diane working herself to exhaustion, saw Comingℹ sacrificing her future to survive the present, and then his own problem arose. Robert's father, Ambrose's grandfather, had been a controlling man even in death. His will contained a clause designed to force Ambrose to settle down if Ambrose wasn't married. By his 35th birthday, he would lose his controlling shares of Barrington Industries. It was a power play from beyond the grave, and it infuriated Robert. But it was also ironclad. Ambrose was 32. That gave them less than 3 years. Robert had been pressuring his son to find a wife, but Ambrose refused every suggestion with cold indifference. "I'll marry when I'm ready," Ambrose said. "Not before." Robert saw the clock ticking. And then, one night in early September, the pieces came together. What if he could honor his debt to Jonathan and solve his son's problem at the same time? Comingℹ Blake was a good woman, educated, kind, grounded in values his son desperately needed. If Ambrose married her, the inheritance clause would be satisfied, and Comingℹ's family would be taken care of for life. It was logical, strategic, perfect. Robert drove to Brooklyn on a Saturday morning. Diane answered the door, surprised to see him after so many years. They sat at her kitchen table, the same table where Jonathan used to sit, and Robert made his offer. "I want to help," he said. "Your medical debts, your health care, Comingℹ's education, all of it, taken care of." Diane's eyes widened. "Robert, that's too much. We can't accept." "There's a condition," he said carefully. "Comingℹ would marry my son, Ambrose." The silence that followed was heavy. "You want to arrange a marriage?" Diane said slowly. "Like some kind of business deal?" "I want to give your daughter security," Robert corrected. "A life where she never has to worry about money again, where she can pursue her passions, where she's protected. By marrying a man she's never met. By marrying a man who will provide for her, who will, in time, come to appreciate her." Diane stood up, anger flashing. "My daughter is not for sale. I'm not buying her," Robert said firmly. "I'm offering her a choice. Present it to her. If she says no, I'll walk away. But I made a promise to Jonathan, and I intend to keep it." Diane struggled with the decision for days. Finally, she sat Comingℹ down and explained everything. Comingℹ listened in stunned silence. When her mother finished, she said, "You can't be serious." "I'm not asking you to do this," Diane said. "I would never force you. But he's offering to clear everything. The debt, my medical care, your future. All of it." Comingℹ felt her world tilting. "Marry a stranger? For money? For family," Diane corrected gently. "But only if you choose it." Comingℹ spent that night alone in her room, crying and praying. She thought about her mother's declining health, the second job killing her slowly, the weight of debt they'd never escape. She thought about the youth center, chronically underfunded, always on the edge of closing. And she thought about her father's voice. "We might not have much, but we've got enough to share." What if she could give her mother rest? What if this sacrifice could free her family? The next morning, she told Diane her decision. "I'll do it," Comingℹ said quietly. "But on one condition, I will be treated with respect and dignity, or I walk away. I'm not anyone's possession." Diane hugged her daughter and cried. 2 weeks later, the contracts were signed. The wedding was set for December 20th. Comingℹ had 3 months to prepare for a marriage to a man she'd never met, a man who had no idea she even existed. Robert waited until mid-October to tell his son. He summoned Ambrose to his office on a Tuesday afternoon, closing the door behind him. Never a good sign. "Sit," Robert said. Ambrose remained standing. "I have a 4 o'clock. Cancel it." The tone left no room for argument. Ambrose sat, irritation already building. Robert slid a folder across the mahogany desk. Plain manila, unremarkable except for the single name written on the tab, Comingℹ Blake. "What is this?" Ambrose asked. "Your bride." The words hung in the air like a grenade with the pin pulled. Ambrose laughed, a short, humorless sound. "Excuse me?" "You're getting married, December 20th. Everything's arranged." Ambrose's expression went from disbelief to cold fury in seconds. He opened the folder. Inside was basic information. Age, 28. Education, master's candidate in social work. Current residence, Brooklyn. Employment, multiple part-time positions, and a photo. It was an ID picture taken at the DMV on what was clearly one of Callista's worst days. Bad lighting, no smile, an old pair of glasses she'd worn before switching to contacts. Hair pulled back severely. She looked tired, plain, unremarkable. Ambrose stared at it for 3 seconds and closed the folder. No. Yes, Robert said calmly. You've lost your mind. Ambrose stood, pacing the office like a caged animal. You expect me to marry this nobody? Her name is Callista Blake. She's the daughter of Jonathan Blake, the man who saved my life in college. I made him a promise. So give her money. Ambrose snapped. Write a check. Set up a trust. Don't marry me off like I'm some medieval pawn. Your grandfather's will requires you to marry by 35, or you lose controlling shares of this company. You have less than 3 years. You've refused every woman I've suggested, so I'm making the choice for you. Ambrose slammed his hands on the desk. I'm not doing this. Robert's expression hardened. Then you'll lose everything. Your position, your inheritance, half of what you've built. You wouldn't. Try me. The two men stared at each other, wills colliding. Ambrose had never openly defied his father. Robert had raised him to obey, to excel, to fall in line. The idea of losing the company, of being stripped of the only identity he'd ever known, was unthinkable. But the idea of marrying a stranger was infuriating. A social worker from Brooklyn, Ambrose said slowly, venom dripping from each word. You're marrying me to a charity case. I'm marrying you to a woman of character. She's after my money. She didn't ask for this marriage. I offered it. Then she saw an opportunity and took it. Ambrose grabbed the folder. Look at her. She's plain, poor, and desperate. This is exactly what she wanted, to land a billionaire and never work another day in her life. Robert's jaw tightened. You're being cruel. I'm being realistic. Ambrose headed for the door. The wedding is in 2 months, Robert called after him. December 20th. Be there, or lose everything. Ambrose left without another word. That night, he met his best friend, Marcus Chen, at their usual bar. Marcus had known Ambrose since Princeton, one of the few people who saw past the Barrington name. Ambrose was already 2 drinks in when Marcus arrived. That bad? Marcus asked, sliding into the booth. My father's lost his mind, Ambrose said bitterly. He's marrying me off to some woman I've never met. Arranged marriage? In 2024. Apparently, Ambrose pulled out his phone, showing Marcus the photo from the file. Callista Blake, a nobody from Brooklyn, social worker. Probably saw $signs and couldn't believe her luck. Marcus studied the photo. You don't know that. Look at her, Marcus. She's plain as dishwater, probably ugly as sin in person, and broke as a joke according to her file. So you're judging her based on a bad photo and a background check. I'm judging her based on reality, Ambrose said coldly. She's a gold digger who hit the lottery. I'll marry her because I have to, but she'll never be anything more than a name on a certificate. Marcus set down his drink. Be careful, Ambrose. You might be wrong about her. Ambrose laughed bitterly. I'm never wrong. But he was wrong about one thing. He'd assumed the marriage would stay transactional, distant, cold. He'd assumed his life would continue exactly as it had. What Ambrose didn't know was that in 2 months, everything he believed about himself, about worth, about love, all of it would shatter the moment he lifted a veil. Robert had arranged one final meeting before the wedding, a dinner in November where Ambrose and Callista would meet face to face. Ambrose didn't show up. He sent his assistant with an excuse about an unavoidable business meeting. It was a lie. He simply refused to waste his time. Callista waited at the restaurant for 2 hours. She sat alone at a table set for 2, watching couples around her laugh and talk, feeling the pitying glances from waiters who saw a woman being stood up. Finally, she left. She took the subway home, climbed the stairs to her room, and allowed herself to cry. She'd expected nothing from this arrangement, but somehow, being treated as worthless still hurt more than she wanted to admit. Across the city, Ambrose poured himself another drink and told himself he'd done the right thing. December 20th was coming, and neither of them was ready. December 20th arrived cold and unforgiving. Callista woke at 6 in the morning, though she hadn't really slept. She'd spent the night staring at the ceiling of her childhood bedroom, listening to the sounds of Brooklyn, waking up around her. Car horns, distant sirens, the rumble of the subway beneath the streets. Today, she would marry a stranger. She sat up slowly, her body heavy with exhaustion and dread. On her nightstand sat a framed photograph of her father, taken years ago when he was healthy and whole. His smile was wide, his eyes warm. Callista picked up the frame, tracing his face with her finger. "I hope you'd be proud of me, Daddy," she whispered. I hope I'm doing the right thing." The photo didn't answer. It never did. She set it down and walked to the window. Snow had fallen overnight, blanketing the neighborhood in white. It should have been beautiful. Instead, it felt isolating, like the world was putting a barrier between her old life and whatever came next. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Callie." Her mother's voice, gentle and careful. "Can I come in?" "Yeah, Mama." Diane entered, already dressed, her eyes red-rimmed from crying she'd done in private. She carried a garment bag, the wedding dress, delivered yesterday by a courier from the Barrington estate. "It's time," Diane said quietly. Callista nodded, unable to speak. They opened the bag together. The dress was nothing like Callista had ever worn. Pure white silk, hand-beaded with delicate crystals that caught the light. A fitted bodice, a flowing skirt, and a cathedral-length veil that seemed to go on forever. It was the kind of gown that belonged in magazines, on runways, on women who lived in worlds Callista had only seen from the outside. "It's beautiful," Diane breathed. "It's not me," Callista said. "Today, it has to be." Diane helped her daughter dress, her hands shaking as she fastened each tiny button down Callista's back. When she finished, they both stood before the mirror. Callista didn't recognize the woman staring back. She looked elegant, polished, like someone who belonged in the Barrington world. But beneath the silk and crystals, she was still the same girl who'd grown up in this brownstone, who'd scraped together tuition money, who'd given her last $20 to a hungry kid. "You can do this," she whispered to her reflection. "You're doing this for family." Diane placed her hands on Callista's shoulders, meeting her eyes in the mirror. "You don't have to," she said for the 100th time. "Even now. We'll find another way. There is no other way, Mama, and I made a choice. I'm going to see it through." Diane kissed her daughter's temple, tears finally spilling over. "You're stronger than I ever was." Callista closed her eyes and prayed, not for love, not for happiness, but simply for the strength to survive what came next. Across the city, in a penthouse that cost more than most people earned in a lifetime, Ambrose Barrington hadn't slept either. He'd given up trying around 4 in the morning. Now he sat at his piano, still in the clothes he'd worn the day before, playing Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. The same piece his mother used to play when he was young. His fingers moved across the keys mechanically, hitting every note with technical precision but no emotion. That was how Ambrose did everything. Perfectly, coldly. The door to his music room opened. He didn't look up. "You're still awake," said a woman's voice. Victoria Barrington, his younger sister by 4 years, crossed the room and sat beside him on the bench. She was one of the few people Ambrose tolerated, mostly because she was one of the few who didn't treat him like a god or a bank account. "Couldn't sleep," he said flatly, still playing. "Nervous?" "No. Liar." He finally stopped, hands resting on the keys. "What do you want, Vic?" "To remind you that you're about to marry a human being, not a business contract." Ambrose stood abruptly, walking to the window. The sun was rising over Manhattan, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. Beautiful, empty. "I'm aware," he said. "Are you? Because you've been treating this woman like she's invisible. You didn't even bother to meet her. There was no point. The point is basic human decency, Ambrose. Victoria's voice sharpened. She didn't ask for this any more than you did. The least you could do is show her respect. I'll fulfill my obligations. That's not the same thing. He turned to face her, his expression hard. What exactly do you expect from me? Love? Romance? This is an arrangement. Nothing more. Victoria stood, crossing her arms. You know, Mother would be ashamed of you right now. The words hit harder than any physical blow could have. Ambrose's jaw tightened. Don't. She raised you to be kind. To see people, not just what they could do for you. And you've become exactly what Father wanted. Cold, calculating, and alone. I'm fine being alone. No, you're not. Victoria's voice softened. You're miserable. And you're about to drag someone else into that misery because you're too proud to try. Ambrose said nothing. There was nothing to say. Victoria sighed, heading for the door. Before she left, she looked back. Give her a chance, Ambrose. You might be surprised. Then she was gone. Ambrose stood alone in his penthouse, surrounded by wealth that had never made him happy, facing a wedding he didn't want. He showered, shaved, put on the custom tuxedo that had been tailored specifically for today, looked at himself in the mirror and saw a man who had everything and felt nothing. Let's get this over with, he muttered. By 8 o'clock, he was in the car heading to the Barrington estate. By noon, he would be married, and his life, though he didn't know it yet, would never be the same. The Barrington family chapel had stood for over 100 years, built by Ambrose's great-great-grandfather in the late 1800s. It was a masterpiece of Gothic architecture, all soaring arches stained, glass windows depicting saints and angels, and stone walls that had witnessed generations of Barrington weddings, christenings, and funerals. Today, it had been transformed. White roses covered every surface, thousands of them, their scent almost overwhelming. Candlelight flickered from ornate holders. Silk ribbons draped the pews. A string quartet played softly in the corner. It was opulent, excessive, exactly what people expected from a Barrington wedding. 200 guests filled the chapel. On one side sat the Manhattan elite, CEOs, politicians, socialites in designer gowns and jewels worth small fortunes. People who attended events like this not out of affection but obligation, networking even during sacred ceremonies. On the other side, looking distinctly out of place, sat Callista's family. Her mother, Diane, wearing the nicest dress she owned, purchased on sale 3 years ago. 2 aunts who'd taken the day off work and borrowed appropriate clothes. 3 friends from the youth center, young and uncomfortable in their Sunday best. 6 people total. The contrast was painful, obvious. Whispers rippled through the crowd. That's her family. I heard she's from Brooklyn, some kind of charity worker. Why on earth would the Barringtons arrange this? Ambrose must be furious. She's probably after his money. What else could it be? One of Callista's aunts overheard and squeezed Diane's hand tightly. Diane kept her eyes forward, refusing to give these people the satisfaction of seeing her discomfort. Her daughter deserved better than their judgment. At the front of the chapel, Ambrose stood at the altar. He looked exactly as he should, impeccable in a black tuxedo, crisp white shirt, perfectly knotted tie. Tall, handsome, composed. Inside, he was a knot of tension. His father stood beside him, playing the role of proud patriarch. Robert's expression was satisfied, almost smug. Everything was going according to his plan. Marcus Chen stood on Ambrose's other side as best man. He leaned over slightly. You okay? Marcus whispered. Fine, Ambrose said through clenched teeth. You look like you're about to pass out. I said, I'm fine. Marcus didn't push it. He'd known Ambrose long enough to recognize when his friend was barely holding himself together. Ambrose stared straight ahead, trying not to think about what he was doing, trying not to think about the woman he was about to marry, someone he'd dismissed as plain, desperate, beneath him. He told himself it didn't matter. This was a transaction, a necessary formality to secure his inheritance. Nothing more. The string quartet shifted into Pachelbel's canon, the signal. Every head turned toward the chapel doors. Ambrose's heart began to pound despite himself. He hated that he felt anything: anticipation, anxiety, curiosity. He wanted to remain detached, indifferent. But his pulse quickened anyway. The doors slowly opened, and there she was. The first thing everyone saw was the veil. It cascaded from a delicate tiara, flowing down over Callista's face and shoulders, extending behind her in a waterfall of white lace that seemed to go on forever. Her face was completely obscured, not even a hint of her features visible through the intricate lacework. But her silhouette was unmistakable. The gown fit her perfectly, hugging curves that were graceful and feminine. She moved with a natural elegance that didn't come from training or practice. It was simply who she was. She was escorted by her Uncle Richard, her father's younger brother, who'd driven up from Baltimore that morning. His hand trembled slightly as he held her arm. "You ready, Callie?" he'd asked before the doors opened. "No," she'd answered honestly. "But I'm doing it anyway." Now, with 200 pairs of eyes on her, Callista forced herself to take one step, then another. Each movement felt like miles. Her heart hammered so violently she was certain everyone could hear it. Her hands were ice cold, despite the gloves she wore. Her breath came shallow and quick beneath the veil. Through the delicate lace, she could see Ambrose waiting at the altar. Tall, impossibly handsome, standing with the rigid posture of a man who didn't want to be there. He looks like a statue, she thought. Maybe he has a statue's heart too. The thought made her want to cry, or run, or both. But she kept walking. As she passed the pews, she heard the whispers. They weren't quiet enough. She's probably plain. Why else would she need such an elaborate veil? I bet she's hiding something. Poor Ambrose. Trapped in this arrangement. Each word was a small knife, cutting into the fragile composure she'd built that morning. Callista lifted her chin higher. "I am my father's daughter," she told herself. "I will not break. Not here. Not in front of these people." At the altar, Ambrose watched her approach. He didn't know what he'd expected. Awkwardness, maybe. Someone who walked like they didn't belong in a place like this. But her posture was regal, confident even. At least she can walk properly, he thought, then immediately felt petty for it. He tried to see her face through the veil, but the lace was too thick. He could make out shadows, the curve of her jaw perhaps, or the line of her neck, but nothing clear. Something stirred in him. Curiosity? Anxiety? He couldn't name it. It doesn't matter what she looks like, he reminded himself firmly. This changes nothing. But his hands felt clammy inside his gloves. His pulse thrummed in his ears. The music seemed to stretch endlessly as she crossed the distance between them. Finally, she reached the altar. Richard placed Callista's hand in Ambrose's. The first touch, Ambrose felt her trembling. Her fingers were shaking inside the delicate lace gloves, her whole body taut with tension. For a split second, just a fraction of a moment, something in him softened. She was terrified. As terrified as he was, maybe more. This wasn't the confident gold digger he'd imagined. This was a woman who was barely holding herself together. She's scared, he realized. The thought caught him off guard. Richard stepped back. The officiant, an elderly minister who'd presided over Barrington ceremonies for decades, opened his Bible. "Dearly beloved," he began, his voice echoing through the stone chapel, "we are gathered here today." Callista stood frozen beside Ambrose, her hand still in his, her face still hidden. She could feel him looking at her, could feel the weight of his gaze even through the veil. What is he thinking? She wondered desperately. Is he disgusted? Disappointed? Angry? She would never know that in that moment Ambrose was thinking nothing at all. His mind had gone blank, overridden by the steady thunder of his heartbeat and the strange uncomfortable realization that the woman beside him was real. Not a concept, not a file in a folder, not a photograph. Real. And in a few short minutes she would be his wife. The ceremony passed in a blur of words neither of them fully heard. Promises about love and fidelity and cherishing one another. vows that felt hollow when spoken by two strangers. When the officiant asked, "Do you, Ambrose Jonathan Barrington, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Ambrose answered without hesitation, "I do." His voice was steady, dutiful, empty. When the same question was posed to Comingℹ, she hesitated, just for a heartbeat, before answering. "I do." Her voice was soft, barely above a whisper, and tinged with an emotion Ambrose couldn't quite identify. Fear, resignation, sadness, all three perhaps. The exchange of rings came next. Ambrose slipped a diamond band onto Comingℹ's finger, a ring his father had selected. Enormous and ostentatious, worth more than most people's yearly salary. It felt cold and heavy on her hand. When it was her turn, Comingℹ's fingers fumbled slightly as she placed a simple platinum band on Ambrose's finger. Her hands were still shaking. Ambrose noticed they were slender, graceful. Her nails were neatly manicured but unpolished, no gaudy colors or artificial length. Simple, natural, unpretentious, he thought, and felt almost impressed. He crushed the feeling immediately. The officiant smiled, closing his Bible. "And now, by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife." He looked at Ambrose. "You may kiss your bride." Time stopped. The chapel went silent, 200 people holding their collective breath. Ambrose's heart gave a violent lurch. This was it, the moment he'd been dreading and inexplicably anticipating. He would lift the veil, see her face, confirm everything he'd assumed. His hands moved almost on their own, reaching for the delicate lace. The fabric was softer than he expected, gossamer thin, despite how thoroughly it had hidden her. He grasped the edge carefully, lifted, and the world tilted on its axis. The veil fell away. Ambrose's breath left his lungs in an audible gasp that echoed through the silent chapel. He froze, hands still raised, holding the veil, completely and utterly unable to move, because the woman standing before him was not what he'd expected, not even close. She was stunning, not in the manufactured way of the socialites he knew, all plastic surgery and designer makeup. This was something different, something real. Her skin seemed to glow in the candlelight, warm and luminous, the kind of beauty that didn't need enhancement. Her eyes, large and expressive, the color of honey touched by sunlight, were brimming with unshed tears and raw vulnerability. Her lips were full, trembling slightly. Her bone structure was delicate, elegant, framed by soft curls that had been pinned back to accommodate the veil. She was absolutely, breathtakingly beautiful. For 5 full seconds, Ambrose couldn't speak, couldn't think, couldn't do anything but stare at her like a man who'd just witnessed something impossible. Every cruel word he'd spoken crashed down on him with the force of a physical blow. Ugly as sin. Plain. Desperate. Nobody. What had he done? The chapel remained silent. Every guest was watching this moment, watching Ambrose's reaction, watching his shock. Some part of him knew he should recover, compose himself, play the role of the unaffected groom, but he couldn't. He was too stunned, too horrified by his own assumptions, too captivated by the woman in front of him. "Beautiful," he breathed, so quietly that only Comingℹ heard it. You're beautiful." Comingℹ's eyes widened in confusion. She'd seen his gasp, seen him freeze, and she'd assumed the worst, that she was exactly as disappointing as she'd feared. But now he was looking at her with something that almost resembled wonder. Is that admiration? She thought, her mind struggling to process it. She'd prepared herself for disgust, for barely concealed disappointment, for a man who would fulfill his obligation and nothing more. This, whatever this was, she hadn't prepared for. Her cheeks flushed under his gaze. She didn't know where to look. Ambrose's voice cracked slightly. He cleared his throat, trying desperately to regain some semblance of control. We should. The officiant, sensing the groom's distraction, prompted gently. "The kiss. Mr. Barrington." Right, the kiss. Ambrose had planned this moment in his head. A quick, perfunctory peck, professional, distant. But nothing about this moment was going according to plan. Slowly, more gently than he'd intended, he reached out and cupped Callista's cheek. Her skin was warm beneath his palm, soft, real. She inhaled sharply at the touch, her eyes locking with his. For a moment, they simply stood there, two strangers bound by vows they hadn't wanted, looking at each other for the first time without barriers. Then Ambrose leaned in and kissed her. The kiss was supposed to be nothing, a formality, a seal on a contract. 5 seconds maximum, witnessed by 200 guests, and immediately forgotten. But the moment Ambrose's lips touched Callista's, everything changed. It was soft, tentative, almost reverent. He'd kissed plenty of women before, models, actresses, socialites looking for his name and money. Those kisses had been calculated, performative. This was different. Callista tasted like hope and fear, and something sweet he couldn't name. Her lips were warm, trembling slightly against his. When she didn't pull away, Ambrose let the kiss deepen, just barely, just enough, to feel the connection between them shift into something neither had anticipated. Callista's breath caught. Her hand moved unconsciously to rest against his chest, feeling his heartbeat hammering beneath the expensive fabric of his tuxedo. He's nervous too, she realized with shock. The kiss lasted perhaps 10 seconds, maybe 15. When they finally parted, both were slightly breathless, slightly dazed. Their eyes met, and in that moment, something unspoken passed between them. This is real now, for better or worse. The chapel erupted in applause, shattering the intimacy of the moment. Ambrose blinked, suddenly aware of where they were, of the audience, of his father's satisfied smile. He offered Callista his arm, the gesture automatic. She took it, her fingers light on his sleeve. They turned to face the crowd as husband and wife. The officiant announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you Mr. and Mrs. Ambrose Barrington." More applause, cameras flashing, guests rising to their feet. Ambrose and Callista walked down the aisle together, the same path she'd walked minutes ago, but everything had changed. He couldn't stop looking at her, stealing glances when he thought she wouldn't notice, trying to reconcile the woman beside him with the assumptions he'd made. She was elegant, graceful, nothing like the desperate social climber he'd convinced himself she'd be. And those eyes. God, those eyes held depths he hadn't expected. Intelligence, strength, pain. What have I done? The thought kept circling through his mind. Callista felt his gaze and didn't know what to make of it. Confusion warred with hope in her chest. He'd looked shocked when the veil lifted. She'd seen that clearly. But shocked in what way? Was he pleased she wasn't as plain as he'd expected? Or was the shock just shock, nothing more? And that kiss had felt real, genuine, like he'd meant it. But maybe she was imagining things. Maybe he was just a good actor. They reached the end of the aisle and exited into the cold December afternoon. Snow was still falling, dusting their shoulders, catching in Callista's veil. A car waited to take them to the reception. Neither spoke as they climbed inside. The door closed, sealing them in silence. Ambrose sat on one side, Callista on the other. Between them stretched an ocean of uncertainty. He'd married her believing she was worthless. She'd married him knowing he didn't want her. And now, somehow, they had to figure out what came next. The veil had lifted, but the real revelation had only just begun. Now, you might be thinking, okay, she's beautiful, he's shocked, everything's going to be fine now, right? Wrong. Because physical attraction doesn't erase weeks of judgment and pain. It doesn't magically fix the fact that Ambrose dismissed Callista as nothing before ever meeting her. And it certainly doesn't solve the fundamental problem. These two people are strangers who just promised to spend their lives together. What happens next will test everything they think they know about each other and about themselves. But before we continue, I need to ask you something. If you're feeling this story right now, if that veil-lifting moment gave you chills, if you're invested in whether these two can make it work, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Tap the notification bell so you never miss a story like this one. Trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming. Because the real challenge, the real test of whether love can grow from such broken beginnings, it hasn't even started yet. Drop a comment below. Do you think Ambrose deserves a chance after how he judged Calista? I read every single one, and I want to know what you think. Now, let's continue. The reception had been endless. 4 hours of forced smiles, champagne toasts from people who didn't know them, and a first dance that felt more like a performance than a moment shared between newlyweds. Ambrose had held Calista stiffly, his hand barely touching her waist, while cameras flashed and guests applauded. She'd felt like a prop in someone else's production. By the time they finally left, rice thrown, goodbyes shouted, car doors closing on the noise, both were exhausted in ways that had nothing to do with physical tiredness. The drive to Ambrose's penthouse took 20 minutes through Manhattan traffic. Neither spoke. Calista watched the city lights blur past her window, her wedding ring catching the glow. The diamond was so large, it felt foreign on her hand, like it belonged to someone else. Ambrose stared straight ahead, his jaw tight, his thoughts a tangled mess he couldn't sort through. When they arrived at his building, a sleek glass tower in Tribeca, a doorman greeted them with professional courtesy. Ambrose nodded curtly. Calista murmured a quiet thank you that seemed to surprise the man. The elevator ride to the top floor was silent, except for the soft hum of machinery. When the doors opened directly into the penthouse, Calista stepped out and stopped. The space was massive. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Hudson River and the glittering cityscape beyond. Everything was modern, minimalist, precise. Chrome and glass and sharp edges. It was beautiful in the way a museum was beautiful. Cold, untouchable, empty. "This is bigger than my entire apartment building," Calista said softly, not really meaning to speak aloud. Ambrose watched her take it in, seeing his home through her eyes for the first time in years. He'd never noticed how sterile it felt until this moment. "The master bedroom is this way," he said, his voice formal, distant. She followed him down a hallway lined with expensive art he'd bought, because his decorator said he should, not because he cared about it. The bedroom was enormous. A king-sized bed dominated the space, dressed in white linens that had probably never been slept in. More windows, more cold, perfect emptiness. Calista stood in the doorway, clutching the small overnight bag she'd brought, the only possession she'd taken with her from her old life tonight. The silence stretched between them, suffocating in its weight. Ambrose cleared his throat. "You can take the bed. I'll sleep in the guest room." Calista looked at him, surprised. "You don't have to." "I insist," he said quickly, cutting her off. He meant it to sound gentlemanly, considerate, a way of giving her space, respecting boundaries. But to Calista, exhausted and emotionally raw, it felt like rejection, like he couldn't bear to share a room with her. Like even after the ceremony, even after that kiss that had made her heart stutter, he still didn't want her. "Okay," she said quietly. "Thank you." Ambrose nodded stiffly. "The bathroom is through there. If you need anything, the staff—" "I'll be fine." Another nod. "Good night then." "Good night." He left, closing the door behind him with a soft click. Calista stood alone in the massive bedroom, still in her wedding dress, and felt the tears she'd been holding back all day finally break free. She cried silently, not wanting him to hear through the walls. Cried for the father who wasn't there to walk her down the aisle, for the mother she'd left behind, for the life she'd given up, for the marriage that felt more like a business transaction than a union. Eventually she changed out of the gown, struggling with the buttons herself, and climbed into the enormous bed. It swallowed her whole. The sheets were expensive, thread count in the thousands, but they felt cold against her skin. She curled onto her side, clutching a pillow, and whispered into the darkness, "What have I done?" Down the hall, Ambrose lay in the guest room bed, still fully dressed except for his jacket and tie. He stared at the ceiling, his mind refusing to quiet. He couldn't stop thinking about her, the way she'd looked when the veil lifted, the softness of her lips during that kiss. The vulnerability in her eyes when she'd said, "I do," and the way she'd smelled, jasmine, he thought, though he wasn't certain, something floral and sweet, and entirely unlike the heavy perfumes the women in his world wore. Guilt gnawed at him like a physical thing, ugly as sin, broke as a joke, a nobody. His own words, spoken with such casual cruelty, played on repeat in his head. He'd judged her without knowing her, dismissed her as worthless based on a bad photograph and his own arrogance. And she was, God, she was beautiful. Not just physically, though that had struck him like a blow, but there was something in her eyes, depth, intelligence, pain, strength, that he hadn't expected. She was real in a way nothing in his life had been for years. Ambrose pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes, frustrated with himself. He should go to her, apologize, try to start this marriage on honest footing, but he didn't, because he didn't know how, didn't know what to say, didn't know how to bridge the canyon he'd created with his prejudice and pride. So he lay alone in the guest room, separated from his wife by walls and something far more difficult to cross. Neither of them slept that night. Both wondered if they'd made the worst mistake of their lives, and neither knew that the hardest part was still ahead. The first morning of their marriage began with awkwardness so thick it was nearly visible. Calista woke early, old habits from years of working multiple jobs, and found her way to the kitchen. She'd thought about making herself breakfast until she realized she had no idea where anything was, and the kitchen looked more like a showroom than a place where people actually cooked. A woman in a crisp uniform appeared, startling her. "Good morning, Mrs. Barrington," the woman said with a polite smile. "I'm Marie, the house manager. Mr. Barrington asked me to prepare breakfast. What would you like?" Mrs. Barrington. The name sounded foreign, like it belonged to someone else. "Oh, I don't need much. Toast is fine." Marie looked almost offended. "I've prepared a full breakfast in the dining room, ma'am. If you'll follow me?" Calista followed, feeling more out of place with each step. The dining room could have seated 20 people comfortably. An enormous table stretched down the center, already set with fine china. Crystal glasses and more silverware than Calista knew what to do with. Ambrose sat at the far end, hidden behind a newspaper. Calista hesitated in the doorway. Marie gestured to the opposite end of the table, 12 feet away from where Ambrose sat. It was absurd, ridiculous, like something out of a movie about rich people who'd forgotten how to be human. But Calista sat anyway, because she didn't know what else to do. A butler, there was apparently a butler, served her coffee, eggs, fruit, pastries she couldn't name. "Did you sleep well?" Ambrose asked from behind his paper, not looking at her. "Fine, thank you," Calista lied. "Good." Silence. The newspaper rustled. Calista pushed eggs around her plate, her appetite gone. This was her life now. Meals in silence. A husband who couldn't look at her. A home that felt like a hotel. The days that followed fell into a pattern of careful avoidance. Ambrose left for work before dawn and returned well after dark. When they did cross paths, their conversations were stilted, formal, painfully polite. "Good morning." "Good evening." "Did you need anything?" "No, thank you." Calista spent her days wandering the penthouse like a ghost. She tried to make herself useful, but the staff did everything. Tried to find a corner that felt like hers, but every room was decorated with the same cold precision. She missed Brooklyn, missed her mother, missed having a purpose. One afternoon, she asked Marie if she could visit her old neighborhood, see her mother. "Of course, Mrs. Barrington. I'll have the driver bring the car around. I can just take the subway." Mr. Barrington was very clear. "You're not to travel alone without security." Calista felt the cage closing around her. "I don't need security to visit my mother." "I'm sorry, ma'am. Those are his instructions." She didn't go. Instead, she called Diane from the bedroom, crying quietly while her mother tried to reassure her that it would get better, that marriage took time, that Ambrose just needed to adjust. Calista wanted to believe her. She brought one thing from her old life into the penthouse, a small potted plant her father had given her years ago, a succulent that had somehow survived 3 moves and her irregular care. She placed it on the windowsill in the living room, a spot of green in all that grey and white. It was the only thing in the entire space that felt alive. Ambrose noticed it that evening when he came home. He stood in the living room doorway, tie loosened, exhaustion written across his face, and stared at the plant. It was small, unremarkable, probably worth less than $5, but it transformed the room somehow, made it feel less like a magazine spread and more like a place where someone actually lived. He found himself wondering about it, about her, about the woman who'd brought life into his sterile world without even trying. Later that week, Comingℹ needed something appropriate to wear for an upcoming lunch with Robert. She stood in front of her meager wardrobe, clothes she'd brought from home, all of them simple, none of them suitable for the Barrington world, and felt panic rising. She chose the nicest thing she had, a simple sundress in pale blue. It was clean, modest, perfectly appropriate for a casual lunch in any normal context. But nothing about her life was normal anymore. When she came downstairs, Ambrose was waiting by the door, checking his watch. He looked up, saw what she was wearing. His expression flickered, just for a moment, with something she couldn't read. "We have lunch with my father today," he said carefully. Is that what you're wearing?" He didn't mean it cruelly. He was genuinely asking, aware that his father would have expectations, trying to warn her. But Comingℹ heard criticism, judgment, confirmation that she didn't belong. Her spine stiffened. "I'm sorry, my wardrobe isn't up to Barrington standards. That's not what I—" But she was already walking away, back toward the bedroom, her eyes stinging with humiliation. Ambrose stood frozen in the foyer, his hand still raised from the gesture he'd started, his explanation dying on his lips. "Damn it," he muttered, slamming his palm against the wall. He'd done it again. Hurt her without meaning to. Put his foot in his mouth because he didn't know how to talk to her like a person instead of a business associate. 20 minutes later, Comingℹ returned wearing the same dress but with a cardigan over it, her face carefully composed. "I'm ready," she said coolly. They went to lunch. It was terrible. Robert dominated the conversation. Ambrose barely spoke, and Comingℹ smiled until her face hurt. Afterward, on the drive home, Ambrose tried to apologize. "Earlier, I didn't mean—" "It's fine," Comingℹ cut him off. "It's not fine. I was trying to help, but it came out wrong. You don't have to explain. I understand perfectly. I don't fit here. I don't have the right clothes or the right background or the right anything. That's not true." She turned to look at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Isn't it?" Ambrose had no answer, because part of him, the part he hated, had thought exactly that just weeks ago. The rest of the drive passed in silence. That had thought exactly that just weeks ago. The rest of the drive passed in silence. That night, Ambrose didn't come home until past midnight, and Comingℹ cried herself to sleep for the 3rd time that week. They were married, living under the same roof, legally bound, but they'd never been more alone. 2 weeks into the marriage, Robert summoned them both to his office. Not a request, a summons. They sat across from his desk like children called to the principal's office, not quite looking at each other. Robert leaned back in his chair, studying them with the same calculating gaze he used in boardrooms. "The Barrington Foundation Gala is this Saturday," he said. "You will both attend, together, and you will present yourselves as a united, happy couple." Ambrose's jaw tightened. "Father, this is not negotiable." Robert's tone left no room for argument. "The press will be there, our business partners, everyone who matters. And they will see a marriage that reflects well on this family. Am I understood?" "Perfectly," Ambrose said coldly. Robert's gaze shifted to Comingℹ. "I've arranged for stylists to prepare you. They'll arrive Friday afternoon." Comingℹ nodded mutely, feeling like a doll being dressed for display. When they left the office, Ambrose was silent, his anger barely contained. Comingℹ understood. She hated being controlled too, but at least they had something in common: resentment of Robert Barrington. Friday afternoon, 3 women arrived at the penthouse with racks of designer gowns, cases of jewelry, and professional makeup kits. They descended on Comingℹ like a well-organized military operation. Arms up, turn around, hold still. They tried dress after dress on her, debating cuts and colors and designers while Comingℹ stood silently, feeling increasingly like an object rather than a person. Finally, they settled on an emerald green gown, silk, floor-length, with a fitted bodice and a neckline that was elegant without being revealing. When they finished with hair and makeup, Comingℹ looked in the mirror and barely recognized herself. The woman staring back was polished, sophisticated, beautiful in a way that felt manufactured. "Is this who I have to become?" she whispered to her reflection. One of the stylists heard and smiled. "You look perfect, Mrs. Barrington." Perfect. Not herself. Perfect. Ambrose waited by the car, checking his watch impatiently. The gala started in 30 minutes. They were already running late because of the styling session he hadn't asked for but his father had insisted on. He heard heels clicking on marble and looked up. Comingℹ descended the stairs carefully, one hand on the railing, the emerald gown flowing around her like water. Ambrose forgot how to breathe. She was stunning. The color brought out the warmth of her skin. The gown hugged curves he'd been trying not to notice, and her hair, styled in soft curls, framed her face perfectly. For a moment, he just stared. Comingℹ reached the bottom of the stairs and looked at him uncertainly. "Is it okay?" He cleared his throat, trying to find his voice. "You look." The words caught. He didn't know how to say what he was thinking without sounding like a fool. "Appropriate," he finished lamely. Comingℹ's expression fell. "Thank you. I think—" Ambrose mentally kicked himself. Appropriate. What was wrong with him? The car ride was silent, tension humming between them. He wanted to tell her she looked beautiful, wanted to apologize for being an idiot, wanted to say 1,000 things. He said nothing. The Barrington Foundation Gala was held at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. 500 guests in designer gowns and custom tuxedos, champagne flowing like water, a string orchestra playing in the Temple of Dender while New York's elite mingled beneath ancient Egyptian stone. Comingℹ stepped out of the car and felt immediately overwhelmed. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. Ambrose placed a hand on her lower back, the first time he'd touched her since the wedding, and guided her inside. The gesture was probably automatic for him. For Comingℹ, it felt like an anchor in a storm. Inside, the whispers started immediately. "That's her? The bride? She's actually quite pretty. But who is she? Where did she come from? I heard Brooklyn. Can you believe it? How on earth did she land Ambrose Barrington?" The comments followed Comingℹ like shadows as Ambrose led her through the crowd, introducing her to business partners and socialites whose names she'd never remember. She smiled, shook hands, made polite small talk, and felt utterly alone despite being surrounded by hundreds of people. Then Selina Vanderberg appeared. Comingℹ recognized her from the society pages, blonde, beautiful in a cold way, dripping in diamonds that probably cost more than Comingℹ's childhood home. She approached with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Comingℹ, isn't it?" Selina's voice was honey-sweet and venomous all at once. "I've heard so much about you." She paused, letting the silence stretch. "Well, actually I've heard nothing at all, which is rather telling, don't you think?" Comingℹ kept her expression neutral. "Nice to meet you too. Tell me," Selina continued, stepping closer, "what exactly did you do to land Ambrose?" "I'm dying to know the trick." Several nearby guests had stopped talking, openly listening now. Comingℹ felt heat rising in her cheeks, but kept her voice steady. "I said yes. That's all." Selina laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "How quaint. You know, Ambrose and I were expected to marry. Our families, our backgrounds, we make sense. But you—" She looked Comingℹ up and down dismissively. "You're just a pretty little novelty, aren't you?" Before Comingℹ could respond, a familiar voice cut through the tension. "Selina." Ambrose appeared at Comingℹ's side, his expression thunderous. In one smooth motion, he slid his arm around Callista's waist, pulling her against him. The gesture was protective, possessive, unmistakable. "Still bitter, I see," Ambrose said coldly. Selina's smile faltered. "I was just getting to know your wife. My wife doesn't need to know you. And for the record," he looked directly at Selina, his voice carrying to the guests still watching, "she has something you never will." "Class." Selina's face flushed with anger and humiliation. Without another word, she turned and stalked away. The watching guests slowly returned to their conversations, the show over. Callista stood frozen, hyper-aware of Ambrose's arm still around her waist, his hand warm through the silk of her gown. He'd defended her, publicly, chosen her over a woman from his own world. She didn't know what to make of it. Ambrose seemed to realize he was still holding her, and slowly released his grip. "Sorry, I should have warned you about her." "You didn't have to do that," Callista said softly. He looked at her, something intense in his gaze. "Yes, I did. You're my wife." The way he said it, not like a business arrangement, but like it meant something, made her heart stutter. For the rest of the gala, Ambrose stayed close to her side. And for the first time since the wedding, Callista felt like maybe she wasn't completely alone in this. They returned to the penthouse just after midnight. Callista's feet ached from the heels she'd worn all evening. Her face hurt from smiling. She was exhausted in every possible way, but she was also something else, something lighter than she'd felt in weeks. Ambrose had defended her tonight, stood by her side, made her feel for a few hours like she mattered. She changed out of the gown and into comfortable clothes, leggings and an oversized sweater, and headed to the kitchen. Sleep felt impossible with her mind still racing. She'd make tea. That always helped. The penthouse was dark and quiet. Ambrose had disappeared into his room immediately upon returning, so she assumed he'd gone to bed. She was wrong. When she entered the kitchen, she found him already there, sitting at the island. In shirt sleeves and dress pants, tie discarded, hair slightly mussed. He looked up, surprised. "Can't sleep either." "No," Callista admitted. "I was going to make tea." "I'll make it," he offered, starting to stand. "I can do it. I like making my own tea. It's normal." He settled back down, a ghost of a smile crossing his face. Normal. That's a rare commodity in this world. Callista filled the kettle and set it to boil, hyper-aware of him watching her move around his kitchen. "Would you like some?" she asked. "Sure." They sat in silence while the water heated, but it was a different kind of silence than before. Less hostile, more comfortable. When the tea was ready, Callista brought 2 cups to the island and sat across from him. Ambrose wrapped his hands around the warm mug. "Tonight was hard for you." It wasn't a question. "I've faced worse," Callista said. "Tell me about it." The request surprised her. He'd never asked about her life before, never seemed interested, but his expression was genuine, open in a way she hadn't seen. So she told him about her father's diagnosis, the 18 months of watching him waste away, working 3 jobs to help with medical bills while finishing her degree. The night he died, holding her mother's hand. "I didn't have the luxury of falling apart," she said quietly. "My mom needed me. So I just kept going." Ambrose listened without interrupting, his eyes never leaving her face. When she finished, the silence stretched between them, but it was heavy with understanding, not awkwardness. "My mother died when I was 8, Ambrose said finally. Callista looked up, surprised. He'd never volunteered personal information before. "I don't talk about her. I haven't in years. But I think about her every day." His voice was soft, almost wondering, like he couldn't believe he was saying these things out loud. "I remember her hands. They were soft. She used to play piano with me. She was patient when I made mistakes. She'd laugh and say, 'Again, my love, you'll get it.'" He stared into his tea, lost in memory. "When she died, everything changed. My father buried himself in work. He never cried, never talked about her. He just shut down, and I learned to do the same. I learned that emotions were weaknesses, that caring about people made you vulnerable. So, I stopped. Callista's throat tightened. That sounds incredibly lonely. Ambrose looked at her, and for the first time, she saw past the walls he kept so carefully constructed. He looked tired, sad, human. It was, he admitted. They sat there in the kitchen, two people who'd been strangers 3 weeks ago, sharing pieces of themselves they usually kept hidden. "I'm sorry," Ambrose said after a long moment, "for how I've been, for the distance, for—" he seemed to struggle with what to say next. "For making you feel unwelcome in what's supposed to be your home too." Callista blinked back unexpected tears. "We're both just trying to survive this. Maybe we can do more than survive." He reached across the island slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. She didn't. His hand covered hers, warm and solid. "I'd like to try," he said. "If you're willing." Callista looked at their joined hands, then up at his face. She saw sincerity there, and hope, and maybe the beginning of something neither of them had expected. "I'd like that too," she whispered. They sat like that for a while, hands joined across the kitchen island, two lonely people who, been forced together, discovering that maybe, just maybe, they didn't have to be lonely anymore. Eventually, Ambrose pulled back gently. "You should get some sleep." "So, should you?" "I will." He smiled, a real smile, small but genuine. "Thank you for talking with me. Thank you for listening." Callista headed toward her room, still the master bedroom, still sleeping alone, but paused at the doorway. "Ambrose." He looked up. "Tonight, when you defended me, thank you for that." His expression softened. "Always. You're not alone in this, Callista. I know it's felt that way, but you're not." She nodded, not trusting her voice, and disappeared down the hall. Ambrose sat alone in the kitchen for a long time after she left, thinking about warm, honey eyes, and a smile that was starting to mean more to him than he wanted to admit. Something was changing between them, slowly, carefully, like the first thaw after a long winter. He went to bed that night, still in the guest room, still keeping distance, but for the first time since the wedding, he felt something that might have been hope. Late January had arrived cold and unforgiving, but inside the penthouse, something was beginning to warm. Two strangers were becoming something more, and neither of them was quite ready to name what that something was. Not yet, but soon. February arrived with snow that blanketed Manhattan in white, transforming the city into something softer, quieter. Inside the penthouse, something else was transforming too. The distance that had defined Ambrose and Callista's marriage began to shrink, slowly at first, so gradually neither could pinpoint exactly when things changed. But they did change. It started with small things. Morning coffee became a ritual they shared instead of endured. Ambrose stopped hiding behind newspapers. Callista stopped eating breakfast alone at the far end of that ridiculous table. Instead, they sat at the kitchen island together, talking about nothing important. The weather, a funny article, plans for the day. Conversations that felt remarkably normal. Ambrose started coming home earlier, not midnight, but 7, then 6. Eventually he began leaving work at reasonable hours, something he hadn't done in years. His colleagues noticed. Marcus called him out on it one afternoon. "You're different," Marcus said, standing in Ambrose's office doorway. "Happier." "I'm the same," Ambrose replied, without looking up from his computer. "You left a board meeting early yesterday to get home for dinner." The old Ambrose would have slept at the office. Ambrose finally looked up. Maybe the old Ambrose had nothing worth going home for. Marcus grinned. "She's good for you." Ambrose didn't argue, couldn't argue, because it was true. Callista was changing his world without even trying. She brought life into the sterile penthouse. Fresh flowers appeared on tables. Throw pillows in warm colors softened the harsh modern furniture. Photographs of her mother, her father, even a few candid shots Marcus had taken of Ambrose, and Callista at a recent charity event replaced the expensive, meaningless art. The penthouse was becoming a home, and Ambrose was becoming someone he barely recognized, someone who smiled more, laughed occasionally, looked forward to the end of the workday instead of dreading the emptiness waiting for him. One evening in late February, Ambrose did something he hadn't done in months. He walked into the living room where Callista was reading and said, "Would you like to join me at the Philharmonic this Friday? They're performing Brahms." Callista looked up, surprised. "You're asking me on a date?" The word hung in the air between them. A date. Despite being married for 2 months, they'd never been on an actual date. "Yes," Ambrose said, suddenly uncertain. "If you'd like to." Her smile was answer enough. "I'd love to." Friday night, they sat in a private box overlooking the orchestra. The music swelled around them, achingly beautiful, stirring something deep in both their chests. Halfway through the second movement, in the darkness of the concert hall, Ambrose's hand found Callista's. She looked at him, surprised. He didn't say anything, just held her hand, his thumb tracing small circles on her palm. Callista laced her fingers through his and held on tight. They stayed like that through the entire performance, hands joined, shoulders touching, something profound shifting between them. Neither mentioned it afterward, on the drive home or when they said goodnight, but neither let go first either. In early March, Callista worked up the courage to ask Ambrose something she'd been thinking about for weeks. "The youth center where I volunteer," she said over breakfast one Saturday. "They're having a big community day next weekend. Would you want to come? Help out?" Ambrose hesitated. It was so far outside his comfort zone, spending a day with kids, doing manual labor, being in a neighborhood, nothing like the ones he frequented. But Callista was looking at him with hopeful eyes. "Sure," he heard himself say. "I'd like that." The following Saturday, Ambrose Barrington, billionaire heir who'd never painted anything in his life except corporate offices in shades of grey, found himself in jeans and an old t-shirt, helping a group of 10-year-olds paint a mural. He was terrible at it. The kids laughed at his crooked lines and color choices. Callista laughed too, but gently, showing him how to hold the brush properly. And something strange happened. Ambrose started enjoying himself. He listened to the kids talk about their dreams. Astronauts, teachers, doctors, artists. He helped a shy boy named David mix colors. He lifted a little girl named Sophia onto his shoulders so she could reach the top of the wall. Across the room, Callista was leading an art class, her face glowing with joy as she praised a teenager's charcoal drawing. She was in her element here, patient, loving, completely present. Ambrose couldn't take his eyes off her. Sophia, still on his shoulders, noticed where he was looking. "Is that your wife?" she asked. "Yes," Ambrose said. "She's really nice." "Do you love her?" The question caught him completely off guard. He looked at Callista, paint-stained, laughing, more beautiful than any woman had a right to be, and felt something crack open in his chest. "I'm starting to," he said quietly. "Yes, I'm starting to," but it was a lie, not the love part. That was true. The starting to part was the lie. Because somewhere between morning coffee and held hands and watching her bring light into his dark world, Ambrose had already fallen completely, irrevocably in love with his wife. He just hadn't admitted it yet. 2 weeks later, on a quiet evening at home, Ambrose did something impulsive. He put on music, jazz, soft and slow. Callista looked up from her book, curious. "Dance with me?" he asked, extending his hand. She set the book down, smiling. "There's no party, no guests, I know. Just us, he confirmed. She took his hand. They swayed together in the living room, the city lights twinkling. Beyond the windows, the music wrapping around them like a promise. Ambrose pulled her closer. Callista rested her head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. "Thank you," he whispered into her hair. "For what?" "For not giving up on this. On me." Callista lifted her head to look at him. "Thank you for trying." He cupped her face gently, his thumb brushing her cheek. They were so close, one kiss away from crossing a line they'd been dancing around for weeks. But Ambrose didn't kiss her. Not yet. Instead, he held her tighter and kept dancing, savoring the moment, knowing that whatever this was between them, it was real, and it was worth protecting. Love, Callista's father used to say, wasn't found in grand gestures. It was found in the small, quiet moments when someone put your needs above their own. By mid-March, Ambrose and Calista were learning that lesson in practice. The youth center where Calista volunteered was facing a crisis. City budget cuts meant they were losing their operating funding. Without it, the programs would shut down and the building would sit empty. Calista was devastated. She spent days making phone calls, writing grant proposals, reaching out to every foundation she could find. But the numbers didn't add up. They needed $200,000 by the end of the month. It was impossible. She didn't tell Ambrose how bad things were. Pride kept her silent. She didn't want to ask him for money, didn't want him to think she'd married. Him for exactly what his cruel email had accused her of being, a gold digger. So she said nothing and worked herself to exhaustion trying to save the center on her own. One afternoon she received a call from the center's director. "Calista, you're not going to believe this. An anonymous donor just paid off our entire debt and gave us an endowment for the next 5 years. We're saved." Callista's hands shook. Who was it? They insisted on anonymity, but Calista, it was a 7-figure donation. She knew immediately. That evening, when Ambrose came home, she was waiting. "Why?" she asked, without preamble. He set down his briefcase, playing innocent. "Why what?" "The youth center. That was you." Ambrose shrugged, loosening his tie. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Ambrose." He sighed. "Caught. You were killing yourself trying to save that place. I could help. So I did. That's a lot of money." "It's just money, Calista. What you do there, what those kids get from you, that's worth more than any balance sheet." She crossed the room and wrapped her arms around him, holding tight. "Thank you," she whispered. Ambrose held her back, breathing in the jasmine scent of her hair, feeling something settle in his chest. "Anything for you," he said. "Anything." Calista showed her love differently. Late March brought a major deal for Barrington Industries, a merger that required Ambrose's attention around the clock. He worked through several nights, sleeping on his office couch when exhaustion won. On the third night, around 10 o'clock, his office door opened. Calista walked in carrying a bag from his favorite restaurant. "You haven't eaten," she said, unpacking containers. "And before you argue, I'm not leaving until you do." Ambrose stared at her. "How did you even get in here?" "I told security I was your wife and that you were working yourself to death." They were very understanding. She'd brought his favorite meal, had remembered from an offhand comment he'd made weeks ago. They ate together on his office couch, her presence somehow making the stress of the deal feel manageable. When he finally dozed off around midnight, Calista covered him with her coat and left a note on his desk. "You're not alone anymore. See." Ambrose woke at dawn to find it and had to sit with the emotion that crashed through him. No one had ever cared for him like this, not since his mother. In early April, Ambrose caught a fever. He'd been pushing too hard. Late nights, early mornings, stress from the merger. His body finally rebelled. When Calista found him in bed at noon on a Tuesday, burning up and barely conscious, she didn't hesitate. She cancelled everything. Called his doctor. Set up camp in the master bedroom with medicine, water, cool cloths. For 3 days, she didn't leave his side. In his feverish state, Ambrose mumbled things he'd never say while conscious. "Don't leave me," he whispered one night, his hand reaching for hers. "Never," Calista promised, stroking his damp hair back from his forehead. "I'm right here." When the fever finally broke, Ambrose woke to find her asleep in a chair beside the bed, still holding his hand. "You stayed," he said when she woke. "Of course I did." "Why?" She looked at him, emotions swirling in her eyes. "Because I love." She stopped herself, the word catching in her throat. But they both heard what she'd almost said. Ambrose pulled her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. "Say it," he whispered. "Not yet," she said, smiling through sudden tears. But soon. Soon came sooner than either expected. Late April in Manhattan brought the first real warmth of spring. On a Friday evening, Ambrose asked Calista to meet him on the rooftop. of the penthouse, a space she'd barely visited since moving in. When she stepped outside, she gasped. The rooftop had been transformed. String lights crisscrossed overhead, creating a canopy of soft gold. A small table was set for two, covered in white linen, candles flickering despite the breeze. And flowers, her favorites, peonies in shades of pink and white, overflowed from vases. Ambrose stood waiting, nervous in a way she'd never seen him. "What's this?" Calista asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "A date, a real one. Just us. What's the occasion?" He stepped closer, taking her hands. You're the occasion." They sat together as the sun set over the city, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. They ate food. Ambrose had somehow learned to cook himself. Simple pasta, slightly overcooked, but made with care. Calista laughed at his culinary confession. "You cooked?" "I watched 3 YouTube videos. It was a disaster until attempt number 4. It's perfect," she said, and meant it. As darkness fell and the city lights began to twinkle below them, Ambrose grew quiet. "Calista, I need to tell you something." She set down her wineglass, nervous at his serious tone. "Okay. When we started this, I didn't want it. I didn't want you." Her breath caught. His honesty stung, even though she knew it was true. But now, he reached across the table, taking her hand. "Now I can't imagine my life without you. You've changed everything. You changed this apartment from a place I existed into a home. You changed my days from obligations into things I look forward to." His voice grew thick with emotion. "You changed me into someone I actually like being." Tears welled in Callista's eyes. "I love you, Calista. I love you more than I ever thought I could love anyone. More than I knew I was capable of loving." The tears spilled over. "Ambrose, you don't have to say it back. I just needed you to know." "Stop talking," she said, laughing through tears. "I love you too. I didn't want to. I fought it so hard because this wasn't supposed to be real. But it is real. You're real. And I love you. I really, really love you." Ambrose stood, pulling her up with him. He kissed her like he'd wanted to for months, not the careful, uncertain kiss from their wedding day, but a kiss full of longing and relief and promise. Calista kissed him back, her hands tangling in his hair, her heart so full she thought it might burst. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Ambrose rested his forehead against hers. "Come to bed with me," he whispered. "Not the guest room, not separate. With me, yes." He led her downstairs to the master bedroom, their bedroom now. They made love slowly, tenderly, learning each other with reverence and care. Every touch was a promise. Every whispered word was a vow, more binding than the ones they'd spoken at the altar. This was their real wedding night, the one that mattered. When they finally fell asleep, tangled together in sheets that smelled like both of them, Calista pressed against his chest, and Ambrose's arms wrapped protectively around her. Both felt peace they'd never known. They'd fallen in love. Against all odds, 2 strangers forced into marriage had found something real, something precious, something that felt unbreakable. They had no idea how soon it would all come crashing down. May arrived warm and bright. Calista had never been happier. She and Ambrose were planning their future now. Real plans, not careful hypotheticals. They talked about combining their resources to expand the youth center, about traveling together that summer, about maybe, someday, starting a family. The word someday had transformed from frightening to exciting. One Tuesday afternoon, Calista was looking for a book Ambrose had mentioned, borrowing. Something about architectural history that he thought she'd enjoy. "Check my office," he'd said that morning. "Second shelf, I think." She entered his home office, a room she rarely visited. It was pure Ambrose, organized, efficient, every surface carefully maintained. She scanned the bookshelves but didn't see the title he'd mentioned. Maybe in the desk? She opened the top drawer. Office supplies. The second drawer. Files. The third drawer stuck. She pulled harder, and it finally gave way, spilling several folders onto the floor. "Damn it," she muttered, kneeling to gather them. One folder had come open, papers scattered. She reached for them and froze. The folder tab read, Callista Blake, her own name, in Ambrose's handwriting, from before they were married. Her hands trembled as she gathered the papers. Inside was the file Robert had given Ambrose, the one with her information, her background, her education and work history, and the photo. She stared at it, that terrible DMV picture from 2 years ago. Bad lighting, no makeup, old glasses she'd replaced months before it was taken. She looked tired, plain, forgettable. Is this what Ambrose had seen? What he'd judged her on? Her stomach twisted. There were notes in the margins. Ambrose's handwriting, sharp and angry. Must I? Ridiculous arrangement. Father has lost his mind. Each word was a small cut. But then she saw it. Clipped to the back of the file, a printed email draft. Never sent apparently, but saved. From Ambrose Barrington to Marcus Chen Ray, the arrangement draft, not sent. She should have stopped reading, should have put it back, but she couldn't look away. Marcus, can you believe this? My father has actually lost his mind. He's arranged a marriage for me, to some nobody named Callista Blake, a charity case from Brooklyn. I've seen her photo. She's probably ugly as sin and broke as a joke. Just another gold digger who hit the lottery by catching my father's attention. I'll marry her because I have to, but she'll never be anything more than a name on a certificate, a means to an end. This is what my life has become. Arranged marriages like it's the 1800s. Callista read it once, twice, 3 times. The words blurred as tears filled her eyes. Ugly as sin, broke as a joke, nobody, gold digger. Never be anything more than a name on a certificate. Every insecurity she'd ever had came flooding back with crushing force. He'd thought she was nothing. Worse than nothing, he'd thought she was using him, taking advantage, beneath him in every possible way. Her hands shook so violently the papers rattled. Had any of it been real? The kindness, the dates, the confession of love on the rooftop? Or had he only changed his mind because she'd turned out to be pretty enough? Because she'd exceeded his pathetically low expectations. She remembered him standing her up before the wedding. His cold distance those first weeks. The way he'd looked at her when the veil lifted. Shocked, yes. But was it? Because he loved her, or just because she wasn't as ugly as he'd expected? Callista's breathing came in short, sharp gasps. The room tilted around her. She heard the front door open. Ambrose, home early like he'd been doing for weeks now. Callista? I brought dinner. That Thai place you like. His footsteps down the hall, getting closer. She couldn't move, couldn't speak, could barely breathe. He appeared in the office doorway, smiling, holding takeout bags. The smile died when he saw her face. What's wrong? Then his eyes dropped to the papers in her hands. The folder on the floor. His face went completely white. Callista, ugly as sin? Her voice came out strangled, broken. Broke as a joke? Oh God. Ambrose dropped the bags, food spilling forgotten across the floor. Callista, I can explain. She stood, papers clutched in her shaking hands, tears streaming down her face. A gold digger. Her voice rose, pain and rage, mixing into something that scared them both. Is that what you really thought of me? I was wrong. I was so completely wrong. You didn't even meet me. She was shouting now, months of insecurity and hurt pouring out. You looked at one bad picture and decided I was worthless, that I was nothing. Callista, please. I was an idiot. You stood me up before the wedding. You refused to even look at me. You dismissed me as trash without knowing a single thing about me. I know, and I'm sorry. Every time you said you loved me. Her voice broke completely. Was it just because I wasn't as ugly as you expected? Was I just good enough to meet your standards after all? No. Ambrose moved toward her, desperate. I love you. Not your face, not anything surface. You. Your heart, your kindness, your strength. How can I believe that? Comingℹ backed away from him. How can I ever trust a single word you say when this is what you thought of me? Because I've changed. You changed me. That person who wrote this, she shook the papers at him. That person is still inside you. Those words came from your heart, from your mind, from my ignorance, from my arrogance, but not from who I am now. Comingℹ laughed bitterly, the sound harsh and broken. I spent my whole life being told I wasn't enough, that I was too dark, too plain, too ordinary. And then I met you, and somehow you made me believe I was worthy of love, that I was enough. Her voice dropped to a whisper, but it was all based on a lie. You only gave me a chance because I turned out to be acceptable. That's not true. Then why did you stand me up? She demanded. Why did you refuse to even meet me before the wedding? Ambrose opened his mouth, closed it. The guilt on his face was answer enough. He had no defense, no excuse. He'd been exactly the person those words described. I thought so, Comingℹ said quietly. The silence that followed was deafening. Ambrose stood frozen, watching his wife, the woman he loved more than anything, break apart in front of him. And it was his fault. All of it. Comingℹ, he tried again, his voice cracking. Please, let me explain. I was a different person then. That person is still inside you, she said flatly. Those words didn't come from nowhere. They came from you, from a version of me that doesn't exist anymore. You changed everything. No, she shook her head, tears still streaming. I didn't change you. I just gave you a reason to pretend to be better. That's not fair. Isn't I too? The anger flared again. You thought I was ugly and poor and desperate. You called me a gold digger. You said I'd never be more than a name on a certificate. And then what? You saw my face and decided maybe I was worth your time after all. It wasn't like that. Then what was it like, Ambrose? Explain it to me. Make me understand how any of what we have is real when it's built on you thinking I was nothing. He had no answer, no words that could undo the damage his cruelty had done. Comingℹ wiped her eyes with shaking hands. I need to leave. The words hit Ambrose like a physical blow. No, please, please don't go. I can't stay here. I can't look at you right now. Comingℹ, I'm begging you. I'm going to my mother's, she said, her voice eerily calm now. I need time to think. How much time? She looked at him with eyes that held so much pain it took his breath away. I don't know. Maybe this was a mistake from the beginning. Don't say that. Don't you dare say that. Why not? You thought it. You wrote it. She moved past him, heading for the bedroom. Ambrose followed, desperate. I love you. God, Comingℹ, I love you so much it terrifies me. That's real. What we have is real. She pulled a bag from the closet and started throwing clothes into it. I wanted to believe that, she said quietly. I wanted it so badly. But how can I trust it when I know what you really thought? When I know you only gave me a chance because I was pretty enough? It's not about your face. It was never about your face. She laughed bitterly. Wasn't it? Be honest, Ambrose. If I'd looked like that picture when you lifted the veil, would we be here right now? Would you have fallen in love with me? He hesitated. Just for a second. But that second was enough. Comingℹ's face crumpled. I thought so. Comingℹ. Goodbye, Ambrose. She zipped the bag, hoisted it over her shoulder, and walked toward the door. Ambrose stood in the bedroom, their bedroom, where just days ago they'd made love and talked about the future, and watched her leave. He should stop her, should fight harder, should do something. But what could he say? How could he defend the indefensible? The front door closed with a quiet click, and Ambrose was alone. The days that followed were the worst of Ambrose's life. He called. She didn't answer. He texted. She didn't respond. He sent flowers. They were returned. The penthouse felt like a mausoleum. Every corner reminded him of her. The plant she'd brought from her old home, still sitting on the windowsill. The photographs she'd hung. The throw pillows she'd added. Evidence of the life they'd been building together. All of it meaningless now. He stopped going to work, stopped sleeping, spent his nights on the couch with a bottle of whiskey, staring at nothing. Marcus showed up on day 4, let himself in with the spare key, and found his best friend unshaven, drunk, and utterly destroyed. "You look like hell," Marcus said. "I feel worse. Have you eaten?" "Not hungry." Marcus sat down heavily. "You have to fight for her, man." "How?" Ambrose's voice was raw. "Everything I said was unforgivable. She's right to hate me. Does she hate you?" "She should." "That's not what I asked." Ambrose closed his eyes. "I don't know. Maybe. Probably. Then prove you've changed. Don't just say it. Show her. Make her see that the man you are now is real. And if that's not enough..." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Then at least you tried." Across the city, in her childhood bedroom in Brooklyn, Calista cried in her mother's arms. "He said he loves me, Mama," she sobbed. Diane stroked her daughter's hair, the way she had when Calista was small. "Do you believe him?" "I did. I wanted to. But how do I trust someone who thought I was trash? People can change, baby. Can they? Can someone really change that much?" Diane was quiet, thinking. "Your father used to say that people show you who they are through their actions, not their words. What has Ambrose shown you these past months?" Calista thought about the anonymous donation to the youth center, the way he'd defended her at the gala, the rooftop dinner he'd planned himself, the 3 days he'd slept on his office couch while she nursed him through a fever. "He's been kind," she admitted, "generous, present. And before you found that email, did you doubt his love?" "No. It felt real." "Maybe it is real," Diane said gently. "The question isn't whether he was terrible in the beginning. He was. Those words were cruel and wrong. The question is whether he's changed enough now, and whether you're brave enough to find out." Calista cried harder because she didn't know the answer. She loved him. She knew that much. But was love enough when it was built on such a broken foundation? She didn't know. She honestly didn't know. "Now I know what you're thinking. Is this really it? Is their love story over before it truly began? Trust me, you're going to want to see what happens next. But before we get to the conclusion, I need you to do something for me. If this story has made you feel something, anger, heartbreak, hope, confusion, drop a comment right now and tell me, should Calista forgive Ambrose? Think about it. He said terrible things. He judged her cruelly without ever meeting her. But he also changed. He showed her love, respect, kindness. He became a better man. Is that enough? Can someone's actions erase their words? Can love survive that kind of betrayal? I read every single comment, and I genuinely want to know what you think. Because here's the truth. Forgiveness is one of the hardest things any of us ever have to do. And sometimes the person who hurt us the most is the same person we love the most. So what would you do if you were Calista? Drop your answer in the comments, and then stay with me, because we're about to find out if love can survive the hardest truth of all. 2 weeks without Calista felt like 2 years. Ambrose barely functioned. He stopped shaving, stopped eating properly, wore the same clothes for days. The penthouse, once transformed into a warm home by Callista's presence, reverted to the cold mausoleum it had always been. Marcus visited daily, worried his friend was actually losing his mind. The business suffered too. Ambrose missed meetings, made careless decisions, snapped at employees who'd never seen him lose his composure. By the 3rd week, Robert Barrington had had enough. He showed up at the penthouse unannounced, let himself in with his key, and found his son sitting in the dark, staring at nothing. "This ends now," Robert said, flipping on lights. Ambrose didn't even blink. "Get out. You're destroying everything you've built. Over a woman? Don't." Ambrose's voice was deadly quiet. "Don't call her a woman like she's replaceable. Fine, over your wife, who left you. It's done, Ambrose. Move on." "I can't." "You will. We'll arrange another marriage if we have to. Someone more suitable." Ambrose exploded out of his chair, months of pain and frustration detonating. I don't want another marriage. Robert stepped back, genuinely shocked. His son never raised his voice. I want my wife. Ambrose's voice cracked. I want Calista. I love her, father. I love her more than this company, more than your money, more than anything you've ever valued. Son, no. You don't get to son me right now. You forced this marriage on me, and I hated you for it. But it was the best thing that ever happened to me. She's the best thing that ever happened to me. Tears streamed down Ambrose's face, the first time he'd cried since his mother's funeral. And I destroyed it. I destroyed her, because I was exactly the man you raised me to be, cold, judgmental, measuring people's worth by their bank statements. He looked at his father with something between rage and desperation. If I have to lose everything to get her back, the company, the money, all of it, I'll do it gladly, because nothing means anything without her. Robert stared at his son for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. Then stop sitting here drowning in self-pity, Robert said quietly, and go earn her back. For the first time in their relationship, Ambrose saw something in his father's eyes that looked almost like respect. Robert paused at the door. Without turning around, he said quietly, "Your mother would have liked her. Calista. She reminds me of Eleanor in some ways." Ambrose stared at his father's back, stunned. Robert hadn't mentioned Eleanor in decades. "Don't lose her, son," Robert said. "Some things are worth more than the company." Then he was gone, leaving Ambrose alone with the first fatherly advice he'd received in 24 years. The next morning, Ambrose woke with clarity he hadn't felt in weeks. Words wouldn't bring Calista back. Apologies wouldn't erase what he'd written, what he'd believed. He needed to show her, through actions, not promises, that he'd changed. He called the youth center where Calista volunteered. "This is Ambrose Barrington," he said, when the director answered. "I understand the landlord is selling your building." "Mr. Barrington, yes. We just got the news last month. We solved our operating budget, thanks to that anonymous donor, but now the property itself is being sold. We're trying to raise funds to buy it, but we're nowhere close. Don't raise the funds. I'm buying the building." Silence. "I'm sorry. What?" "I'm purchasing the property and deeding it to the non-profit. Permanently. You'll never have to worry about rent or lease renewals again." "Mr. Barrington, that's over $1 million. It's handled. I'll have my lawyers contact you today." "I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything. Just, if my wife asks, tell her an anonymous donor handled it." He hung up before the director could respond. But Ambrose wasn't finished. The next Saturday, he showed up at the youth center at 8 in the morning, wearing jeans and an old t-shirt, ready to work. The staff recognized him immediately and looked confused. "I'm here to volunteer," he said simply. "Where do you need me?" They put him to work painting, organizing supplies, setting up for an art class. The kids didn't care that he was a billionaire. They just saw a tall guy who was surprisingly bad at painting straight lines and made them laugh when he accidentally got paint in his hair. Ambrose came back the next Saturday, and the one after that. No press, no photographers, no announcement or publicity, just a man showing up, doing the work, trying to earn something money couldn't buy. "Why do you keep coming?" One of the staff asked him after the third week. "Because this mattered to my wife," Ambrose said, "and I need to understand why. I need to see what she saw. I need to become the man she believed I could be." On the fourth week, Ambrose sat down and wrote a letter. Not an email, not a text. A letter, handwritten on paper, the way people used to communicate when words mattered. "Calista, I don't know if you'll read this. I wouldn't blame you if you threw it away. But I need to say things I should have said weeks ago, months ago. Before we even got married, I was arrogant. I was blind. I was cruel. The man who wrote those words about you, who called you ugly and poor and a gold digger, that man deserves to lose you. He deserves to spend the rest of his life regretting what he threw away. But I'm not asking for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it. I'm asking for a chance to earn it. You taught me that worth isn't measured in bank accounts or social status. You taught me that real wealth is found in kindness, in sacrifice, in loving someone more than yourself. You saw something in me I couldn't see in myself, and you loved me anyway. I've spent the last month trying to become the man you believed I was. Not through words, but through action. I've been volunteering at the center. I've been learning what you already knew, that the most valuable thing we can give is our time, our presence, our care. I'm not the same person who wrote those terrible words. I'll never be that person again. But I understand if you can't forgive me. I understand if the damage is too deep. Still, I'm asking you to come to the youth center this Friday at 6 p.m. If you don't come, I'll understand. I'll respect your decision, and I'll leave you alone. But if you do come, I promise I'll spend the rest of my life proving I'm worthy of you. I love you, Comingℹ. I've never meant anything more. Yours, Ambrose. He sent the letter with 24 peonies, her favorite flowers, and then he waited. The longest wait of his life. Comingℹ received the letter on a Tuesday afternoon. Her mother brought it to her, still living in her childhood bedroom, still trying to figure out what came next. She stared at the envelope for a long time before opening it. When she finally read it, tears blurred the words. Diane found her daughter sitting on the bed, letter clutched in her hands, crying silently. "What does your heart say, baby?" Diane asked gently. "That I still love him," Comingℹ whispered. "I never stopped. Even when I was so angry I could barely breathe, I still loved him." "Then you have your answer. Do the first." Comingℹ looked at her mother with red-rimmed eyes. "What if he hurts me again? What if this is just temporary? What if he goes back to being that person who thought I was nothing?" Diane sat beside her daughter, taking her hand. "You could ask, what if, forever? What if he changes back? What if he doesn't? What if you forgive him and regret it? What if you don't forgive him and regret that instead?" She squeezed Comingℹ's hand. "But here's what I know. That man has been volunteering at your center for a month. Every Saturday, the director called to tell me. He shows up, works hard, doesn't ask for recognition. He bought the building so the center will never close." Comingℹ's eyes widened. "He what?" "Bought the whole building, deeded it to the non-profit, anonymously, or so he thought." Fresh tears spilled over. Why would he do that? Because he loves you. And love isn't just words, baby. It's action. It's showing up even when it's hard. It's changing because the person you love deserves better. Comingℹ read the letter again, this time seeing past her pain to the truth underneath. Ambrose had been cruel, but he'd also changed. Really, genuinely changed. The question was whether she was brave enough to believe in that change. "I have to know for sure," she said finally. "I have to see him, face to face." Diane smiled. "Then you know what to do." Friday evening arrived cold and clear. Comingℹ stood outside the youth center at 6:05, her heart pounding so hard she felt dizzy. She almost turned around 3 times, but she didn't. She walked around to the backyard where Ambrose's letter had told her to go. What she found took her breath away. The entire space had been transformed. String lights crisscrossed overhead, creating a canopy of warm gold against the darkening sky. Small luminarias lined the pathways. And in the center of it all stood every child from her art program, holding handmade signs. "We love you, Miss Comingℹ. Mr. Ambrose is sorry. Please give him another chance. Love is real." The kids grinned at her, bouncing with excitement at being part of whatever this was. And there, standing behind them, looking more vulnerable than she'd ever seen him, was Ambrose. Not in a designer suit, not polished and perfect. Just him, in jeans and a simple button-down shirt, his hair slightly disheveled, his eyes red-rimmed like he hadn't been sleeping. He looked terrified, hopeful, human. "Comingℹ," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "You came." "I almost didn't," she admitted. "I know, and I wouldn't have blamed you." The kids, sensing this was their cue, quietly dispersed to the sides, giving them space but staying close enough to watch. Ambrose took a shaky breath. "Before I met you, I measured everything in money. Success, status, power. Those were the only things I thought mattered." He stepped closer. "I looked at your file and saw someone beneath me. Someone not worth my time, That's who I was. Small, cruel, blind. Another step. But then I lifted your veil, and I didn't just see your beautiful face. I saw my own ugliness reflected back at me. His voice thickened with emotion. Every day since then, you've shown me what real wealth looks like. It's kindness. It's sacrifice. It's loving people more than things. It's giving when you have nothing left to give. Tears streamed down his face now, unashamed. I was a fool. I was cruel. I was wrong about you in every possible way. He dropped to one knee, right there in the dirt, in front of the kids and staff, and the woman he loved more than life itself. I'm not asking you to forget what I said. Those words will always be part of our story, and I'll spend my life trying to make up for them. He looked up at her, his heart in his eyes. I'm asking you to let me spend the rest of my life proving those words were the biggest lie I ever told. His voice broke completely. Callista Blake Barrington, will you give me another chance? Will you come home? Callista stood frozen, tears pouring down her face, her heart warring with her head. You hurt me, Ambrose, she said, her voice shaking. More than anyone ever has. I know. You made me doubt everything. Myself, us. Whether any of it was real. I know, he whispered. And I'm so sorry. But, she took a trembling breath. You've also loved me more than anyone ever has. You've shown me what it means to be seen, to be valued, to be cherished. She stepped closer. And I think everyone deserves the chance to become who they were meant to be, including you. Hope flickered in his eyes. Yes, she whispered. I'll give you another chance. I'll come home. Ambrose stood, and in one motion pulled her into his arms. She wrapped herself around him, both of them crying, both of them holding on like they'd never let go again. The kids erupted in cheers. The staff applauded. Someone turned on music, and Ambrose kissed his wife, really kissed her, pouring every ounce of love and gratitude and promise into it. When they finally broke apart, Callista touched his face gently. Don't make me regret this, she whispered. Never, he promised. I swear to you, never again. They held each other as the lights twinkled overhead and the kids danced around them. Two broken people, choosing to be whole together. Two strangers who'd become everything to each other. A love story that had started with the worst assumptions and ended with the most beautiful truth. That love, real love, could heal almost anything, if you were brave enough to try. 1 year later, December 20th arrived once again, but this time, everything was different. Ambrose and Callista stood in the same youth center where they'd reconciled, surrounded by the same string lights, the same warm glow. But this time, they weren't broken. They were whole. They'd chosen to renew their vows here, in this place that meant so much to both of them, rather than in the cold opulence of the Barrington Estate Chapel. The guest list was small, intimate, people who actually mattered. Diane sat in the front row, beaming with pride, healthy again now. That stress and financial worry had been lifted from her shoulders. Robert Barrington sat beside her. An unlikely friendship had formed between them over the past year. He'd softened, gradually, watching his son become a man he could actually respect. Victoria sat next to her father, tears already streaming down her face. She'd been right about Callista from the beginning, and she'd never let Ambrose forget it. Marcus stood as best man again, grinning because he'd known all along they'd figure it out. The kids from the art program served as unofficial flower girls and ring bearers, delighted to be part of the celebration. And Callista stood across from Ambrose, radiant in a simple white dress, her hand resting protectively over the gentle swell of her belly. 4 months pregnant, with their first child. Ambrose couldn't take his eyes off her. The officiant smiled. Ambrose, would you like to share your vows? Ambrose took Callista's hands, his voice steady and sure. 1 year ago, I lifted a veil and found my whole life changed. I thought it was your beauty that changed me, and you are beautiful, breathtakingly so, but it wasn't your face. He pressed her hand to his chest, over his heart. It was your heart, your kindness, your strength, your ability to see good in someone who didn't deserve it. His voice grew thick. Thank you for not giving up on me. Thank you for seeing in me what I couldn't see in myself. Thank you for teaching me that the best things in life can't be bought. They can only be earned through love." Callista wiped tears from her cheeks, smiling. "1 year ago," she began, her voice soft but clear, "I married a stranger who didn't want me. I walked down an aisle to a man I'd never met, terrified and alone." She squeezed his hands. "Today, I renew my vows with my best friend, my partner, my love, the father of my child." She touched his face gently. "Thank you for becoming the man I always knew you could be. Thank you for showing me that people can change, that redemption is real, and that love, true love, is worth fighting for." They kissed as husband and wife again for the second time. But this time, it meant everything. The reception was loud and joyful. Nothing like the stiff, formal affair their first wedding had been. Kids ran around with cake. Music played. People danced without caring who was watching. Ambrose held Callista close as they swayed to a slow song, her head resting on his shoulder, his hand protective over her belly. "We're going to have a baby," she whispered, still amazed by it. "We are," he confirmed, kissing her temple. "And they're going to grow up knowing they're loved, both of us, always. No cold penthouse childhood, no cold anything. I promise." Their penthouse had been transformed over the year. It was warm now, lived in, full of photographs and color and life. They'd even adopted a dog, a rescue named Charlie, who slept at the foot of their bed. Callista ran the Barrington Foundation's education initiative now, combining her passion with his resources to fund programs across the city. Thousands of kids had access to art, music, and mentorship because of her work. Ambrose had stepped back from some of his business obligations to focus on what mattered: family, purpose, using his wealth for good rather than just accumulation. He was successful still. But success meant something different now. It meant coming home to his wife, volunteering on Saturdays, planning for their child, building a life that mattered beyond bank statements and board meetings. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Ambrose and Callista stood together, watching the kids clean up decorations. "Do you ever regret it?" Ambrose asked quietly. "Giving me that second chance?" Callista turned in his arms, looking up at him with eyes full of love. "Not for a single second," she said. "You're the best decision I ever made. I thought I was a decision your mother made." She laughed. The arrangement was her idea. "Falling in love with you. That was all me." He kissed her, slow and sweet, grateful beyond words for the grace he'd been given, for the chance to become better, for the woman who'd believed in him when he didn't believe in himself, and for the love that had transformed them both. The millionaire who once scorned his arranged bride, who called her ugly and poor and beneath him, had learned the most important lesson of all. Never judge someone before you truly know them. Worth isn't measured in money or status or appearance. It's measured in character, in kindness, in the content of a person's heart. Ambrose had lifted a veil that December day and seen a beautiful face. But it took months for him to see what really mattered, the beautiful soul beneath. True beauty is found within, always. Wealth isn't counted in bank accounts. It's counted in the people you love and who love you back, in the lives you touch, in the difference you make. Ambrose Barrington had everything money could buy, but he had nothing of value until he had Callista. And people can change. Redemption is real. When someone is willing to do the work, to face their flaws, to become better, transformation is possible. But it requires something money can't buy: humility. Callista's choice to forgive wasn't weakness. It was the strongest thing she ever did. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means choosing to move forward, to give someone the chance to prove they've changed. It's a gift, and sometimes it's the gift that saves us all. Their story began with the worst assumptions and the cruelest words. But it ended with the most beautiful truth: love transforms everything. The person you think is wrong for you might be exactly who you need. The arrangement you never wanted might be the blessing you never knew to ask for. And sometimes the greatest love stories are the ones that almost didn't happen, all because someone was brave enough to lift a veil. and see what was really there. Thank you so much for staying until the very end of this story. If this touched your heart, if it made you think about how you judge others, or reminded you that everyone deserves a second chance, or showed you that true beauty has nothing to do with appearance, then this story did exactly what it was meant to do. Here are the lessons Ambrose and Callista learned, and the ones I hope you'll carry with you. Never judge by appearances. Ambrose almost missed the love of his life because he judged without knowing. True wealth isn't money. Love, kindness, and integrity are the real treasures. People can change. Redemption is possible when someone is willing to do the work. Forgiveness is strength. Callista's choice to forgive wasn't weakness, it was courage. Love is found in unexpected places. The best things often come in packages we didn't expect. If you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Join the Mr. Roman's Story Vault family and never miss a story that will make you laugh, cry, and believe in love again. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications right now. Drop a comment below. What was your favorite moment? And what lesson will you take away from Ambrose and Callista's story? Until next time, remember, true beauty is found within. See you in the next story.